Good afternoon. Post-lunch sessions are normally fairly exciting. And I thought, what's the best way to inspire even more excitement? So I'll start with a few questions, fairly open-ended questions. I'm sure through the day, we've talked about digital, we've talked about security, we've talked about DPDP, we've talked about many such events. So here is a small question and a quiz. How many of your organizations, just raise your hand, how many of your organizations today actually believe and are pursuing and meeting partners, consultants, technology firms around the application of generative AI? Just raise your hand. If you are having a conversation with someone on generative AI, how many people or how many of your organizations actually have implemented a cost-effective private generative UI use case? I'm not talking about generative use case on public data. I'm talking about generative AI on private data, which is your enterprise data. And friends, I saw a lot of hands first. I saw not a single hand the second time, and that's exactly what I want to address in this session today. Because when we talk about impact of digital and analytics and data, we spend a lot of time talking about what is the potential on what can be done there. I thought, let me start the journey the other way around. What are the challenges of doing it and why people are not able to do it? Because when we look at insurance industry, and at least the firm I come from, Max Life Insurance, there is a part of the firm that takes us to the future, right? There's a part of the firm that will always be working on the cutting edge, on the new of generative, the new on digital, the new on customer experiences. And you have a Life Asia or an engineering sitting behind. Right? Now that's reality. The question is, how do you deal with that dichotomy? How do you progress on the journey of transformation and change driven by digital and data with all the constraints that we have had as an industry? How do we solve for that conundrum is what my attempt today is in this very short conversation. So here's the world. There's a world of challenges. There's a world of opportunities. We talked about opportunities, AI, regulatory change. For example, regulatory change itself today, the newer platforms are going to help us significantly drive change markets. There is a significant change that is happening around our ecosystem, the Bharat stack, the India stack. What sort of opportunity does the Bharat stack give to us in terms of expanding the markets? Significant opportunity around open architecture and a challenge as well. The digital consumption needs and the persona change that is happening in even rural India. In fact, we did a survey recently, our IPQ survey, which we do. It threw out a very interesting data. It said that don't expect the need for a digitally customized product or a solution only to exist in urban and semi-urban India. Even in rural India, today the expectation of people to have a customized digital journey has increased significantly. Why? Because India has a leapfrog. If you see as a nation, we have leapfrogged that digital penetration challenge when we have reached our rurals through the mobile phone. That expectation around seamless journeys is there as well. And finally, last but not the least, is the whole rise of insurtech. Now, these are the opportunities. But we are also dealing with significant levers that will impact us, which is, what do I do with my life issue or my engineering? How do I transform along with that behemoth that takes me many years ago? The last transformative patch that got applied in engineering, which is a typical policy administration system, with the exception of the one that they rolled out about a year and a half ago, the last update was 6 years ago. The year before that update was 14 years ago. That's how these legacy systems have moved and transformed over the years. How do you drive the digital transformation process when the pace of the legacy systems is completely on a different edge altogether? We talked significantly about DPDP, we talked about cybersecurity. The rise of super apps. A lot of the rings, one ring to rule all the other rings. Similarly, one app, the customers need one single app where they want to consume every single capability. The seller, the advisors want to consume all the capability within one single platform. How do you drive that? How do you embed then your app in somebody else's ecosystem? Then there are certain softer parts of this challenge, which is what is the employee value proposition of a digital and tech person? And no offense to insurance industry, but if you go and ask a techie who just passed out of engineering major school, hey, what is your company that you aspire to work with? Do you believe they will say insurance? Very frankly, they won't. I've hired and worked in that industry for 20 plus years, and I'm yet to find a person who comes out of a Caltech or comes out of even the best engineering schools out there and says, I'm learning technology because I want to apply to insurance. First order of preference, startup. Second order of preference is, tech, fintechs, major consulting firms, banks, and insurance comes somewhere later. How do we as a group compete for that talent in this world, and hence, what is the value proposition? And finally, what sort of a challenge does this digital analytics transformation have on the type of mindset that we want to create in the organization? Because many times we talk a lot about our technology, but at least in my experience, the biggest impediment to change through digital and analytics is the mindset first. Because all the digital and tech teams, they will create a lot of POCs, a lot of ideas in a corner, and 70 of those out of 100, they will be running out of the business to get convinced, what, I can solve this problem 85%, 90% accurate. Can you at least let me implement it? And well, we are insurers, we are risk averse to begin with, and our risk profile always says, what, either you solve it 100% or wait. How do you drive that adoption? And hence, what sort of a learnability mindset is required when we are hiring leaders in our businesses, in our industry, so that we are able to drive the transfer? So those are the typical challenges that I would like to address today with you. Let's talk about the opportunities first, right? We talked about Gen AI. So let me a question for all of you. When Gen AI, the ChatGPT version 4 was launched, for one bi-dimensional prompt query, all of us know that ChatGPT works on prompts. That's how the costing also works. For a one question to ChatGPT, where there are two prompts embedded in one question, what is the total cost of getting that answer on your screen? Just take a guess. Just take a guess. Per transaction, per query, per question, what would be a cost when ChatGPT 4 was launched? What would be the cost of getting that query on your screen? Because somewhere somebody's computing, right? Some server somewhere sitting in either mid-sea, because these days they make data centers in seas to maintain temperature, right? Somewhere that compute is happening and somebody's paying for it. Any guess how much they were paying for it? $22.6. This was when the first version of GPT-4 was launched. Now the question is, a monster is out there and everybody's using it left, right and center. Who's paying for it? Who's paying for the compute today? Because the era of monetization is yet to happen. And hence, while there is a lot of very required innovation that should be done around applications of Gen AI, when it comes to public data, it is very, very cost effective. But the moment you want to make Gen AI effective in our organizations, you have to transition that model from a public database to an enterprise learning database. That causes 5.2 times per transaction. So one challenge that we have to solve for is, it's something that all of us have to invest and learn, all of us have to apply, but we have to apply with a very clear idea that the cost economics of generative AI, you will not be able to build a viable business case today. But that should not prevent us from innovating, driving the first solutions, the first models. But if CBA is our cost benefit analysis and approach for evaluating some of these Gen AI projects, they may lead us together to wrong conclusions. So one learning that we have had is, yes, that cost is going to be significant. Even in the US, the take-up on Gen AI cases as implemented on enterprise data are few and far between. primarily because of cost. So how do we make sure that we choose our use cases specifically in areas of, for example, customer service, whatever is process driven, very extremely good area for use cases, whatever is driven with enabling, training, very classic use cases. A digital underwriter twin, a very classic use case again. But we have to be very, very sharp and very, very particular about what are those one or two use cases that we will begin with. And that's where you leverage it the most. But still, the cost structures of the new platform are not ready for a rapid enterprise-wide adoption. That will take some time. We talked about significant regulatory changes, and one impact that the regulatory changes will have is on the architecture and design of our application. That's what we learned was that as the newer platforms are coming in, the ability to have an open AI stack, API stacks, API portals, they'll become very much part and parcel of the fundamental design that we built our future applications with. We also talked about in details about the consent management bill and the consent management issues that we will have to navigate, but it will significantly change all our customer journeys at the digital ecosystem stack, and that's one question we are dealing with as insurance, as Max Life Insurance is. In the future, whom are we competing with for the wallet share of the money? As far as ease of financial products is concerned, we will be competing with a completely online provider who does almost all of your financial underwriting without asking you a single document. All of us have had the experience of buying life insurance policies. I'm sure if you buy a term policy especially, I'm sure there's significant amount of data friction that is there, document friction that is there, especially salaried. Salaried is easy because salaried you have a structured information available, but what about non-salaried part in India? Now with only almost 82% of income still not being protected in India, a big component of that gap is coming from non-salaried. And Bharat Stack today is potentially going to be the next lever for driving that information flow into our underwriting systems so that we are able to assess financial wellness without documentation. Account aggregation as a framework is now penetrating our lives more and more. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time that we have a significant part of financial underwriting being completely driven by Bharat Stack data. And hence, POCs on that today, the preparedness on that today, the participation in the account aggregation ecosystems becomes extremely critical for us to build that capability today. This industry has seen open architecture, continues to see open architecture. The recent regulation change where one bank insurance partner can actually engage with 9 players instead of 3. Also then creates an opportunity where even how quickly we integrate with a normal player coming on board becomes a differentiating capability. Gone are the days when a new bank will wait for 6 months to build the integrative layer between you and the bank. Gone are the days. And hence, extremely critical that when we look at our architecture, our core tech stack, that tech stack should be exposable, that tech stack should be integratable, and the customer should be able to experience the journey end to end from purchase to service to end to claim through either platforms. Now I'm absolutely certain that's a logic that everybody gets very, very intuitively. But what about customer ownership? A new challenge that is facing this industry, at least the insurance industry, is as the systems become more and more coupled between the partners, the question of who owns the customer comes in. How do you make sure that customer ownership and customer data richness is retained even despite the strong integration? Talked about the digital customer, and last but not the least, there is a lot of play around InsurTech because all those capabilities cannot be built in-house. When we're looking at wellness as an ecosystem, so you would have seen in the wellness ecosystem that we have people who will have their quote-unquote capability embedded in a much larger ecosystem of, let's say, 20 apps or 20 capabilities. So somebody who's providing, let's say, an insurance would also be on the same platform having a capability with somebody from, let's say, lab testing, or somebody from health and fitness, clubs, or somebody from a membership with, let's say, NG1, right? All these platforms are coming together in one integrative health, life, wellness ecosystem. It's a matter of time that when we talk about composite licensing, it's there on the cards, it's getting discussed. It's a matter of time when it comes our way. But the composite licensing will absolutely necessitate a much more broadening of this insurtech ecosystem, because people will be forced then not to build everything in-house, but really to make sure and they drive integration with very, very diverse platforms across the board. How do we deal with these challenges then? On the challenges side, I talked about the drag of legacy systems. And the approach that we have taken, it's a twin approach, and different organizations take different approaches to it, but at least in the insurance space where the legacy systems contain policy data for almost 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Very few, very, very few examples of uproot and a complete change of the core systems. Mostly everybody is trying to do what we call as hollow the core, where slowly systems like Ingenium, systems like Life Asia are only getting renegated to a status of system of records. And everything else around those core systems is being modernized on a concurrent stack. Hence, people are avoiding the big cost of replacement of a big bang pass. They are avoiding it. But at the same time, they are decoupling the customer experience from the core systems, so that you are able to modernize the front end despite not investing to uproot and taking the risk of uprooting and spending 100, 200 crores on just changing the core systems. We talked about data regulation, and there was a great question I think that Delpa, you raised regarding the outsourcing strategy, right? So one big impact of the regulation is also on the org structure. Suddenly, this role of chief data officer becomes extremely important, and the regulation actually says, the DPDP regulation says that the role of a data protection officer will be different than the role of a CISO. They are two different roles. Now, the role of data officer has to be also then complemented by the roles of what we call as data stewards. There's a question, if I ask you, in your organization, if you go back and ask the question, who owns this data? Half the times people think IT owns data because they store it. I've got some of my IT colleagues sitting out there, and we get some hilarious stories when we ask, hey, who owns this correctness of this policy number? Invariably, the answer comes, find the tech guy who's dealing with the database. The reality is, no, that person does not own that data. The data is owned by the business. But unfortunately, the business has never had that ability to dissect how the data is stored, what veracity it has, what accuracy it has, what concurrency it has. And it has always been a challenge. How do you define accountability as far as data replication is concerned? Many of us in this industry, we deal with dedupe. Can people raise who have heard of the issues around duplication logic? How do you find that a customer already exists when somebody applies for a new policy? It's a very simple logical issue, right? Because obviously, if the customer exists, then there's a question of maximum sum assured, all those considerations come into play for underwriting. So the problem is, my name is Manu Lavanya, and I've applied for a policy, and you go and check in the system whether a Manu Lavanya exists. Here is a challenge. There'll be Manu Lavanya for sure. There'll be Manu.Lavanya. There will be a Manu.Lavanya. There will be Manu Lavanya with the same name, but a slightly different address, because somebody has left, instead of door number, somebody has written the quarter number. Yeah? The simple challenge is, how do you make sure the two Manu Lavanyas are same? Industry has struggled to solve this problem since inception. Even today, the maximum dedupe accuracies that people are able to achieve is 98, 99, about 98.5, 98.6, maybe closer to 99. But 99 on a base of 40 lakh customers is a large number. That 1% makes a big difference. And hence, the issue around data has to reflect itself in architecture, has to reflect itself in org structures, ownership, and most importantly, the outsourcing contracts. One is writing back-to-back contracts, but unfortunately, friends, actually try doing it with any of your existing vendors. I would be in deep admiration even if you are able to change 5% of your existing small vendors to go and rewrite their contracts and accept their back-to-back contractual limitation that you're going to put on them because of DPDP. They will not accept it because they have never priced the contract that way. And none of us would be ready for a 60 or 50 or a 60% escalation of price just because DPDP wanted that. Just because now I have to put other systems in place. And hence, very, very critical that we have to relook at our outsourcing strategy. At Max Live, we are trying to evaluate actually, does it even make sense to have vendors, small contracts, mom and pop shops? It doesn't make sense. Does it drive us towards consolidation? Potentially, maybe. Does it drive us towards a GDC model where my data is within my confines and the entire GDC is managed from a premises perspective, from a data access perspective, within the virtual boundaries of my own enterprise? Does VDI, for example, would you end up giving 30,000 rupees per pop VDI to all the people because now you would want people to come in your system and access everything rather than fishing out those applications and that data outside. So those are the considerations that we are dealing with it today as with the advent of data regulation. We talked about security, but let me touch upon a much more softer item. What is the digital employee value proposition? This is an employee, as I said, how do we attract that talent? How do we retain that talent? The war for talent, how do we win that? We have to really rethink how do we even brand that team separately in our organizations. Unfortunately, in the world of insurance, when you have a digital tech Gen Z, I'll just share a very, very quick insight with you that I was talking to a Gen Z and she had spent about 2 years in the firm and she said, hey, I want to leave. What's the problem? Are you unhappy with us? No, I'm very happy. Then what's the problem? Is the role not good? No, the role is great. Then the role is great. You're doing good. Is the money bad? No, the money is absolutely good. Then why do you want to leave? And the response I got was, are you crazy? What do you expect me to stay for 5 years in the same company? Which world are you living in? All my friends who just passed out of college 2 years ago, they spent 2 years in their respective firms and everybody is changing. So I'm changing as well. I want to see the world. I want to experiment. Today the generation is fearless. Hence, what will attract them is very different than what attracted us. And hence the relook on policies, the relook on even how they are seated, even where they sit in the organization, their office, the look and feel, the policies, retention, it becomes a significant challenge and has to be thought very, very differently than the rest of the organization. Because you are not competing with insurance for this talent. The Flipkart and the Nykas and the Amazon of the world are competing exactly for the same talent as this batch, as we are competing with. And they have a very different mindset. They have very global practices, global policies. That's what people will be benchmarking with. You ask somebody to do a swipe in, swipe out every day for attendance and they will hate that. Saying, hey, none of my friends do it in other firms. Why are you asking me to do it? Those are the challenges or those are the reforms that need to be done as far as the policies are concerned. And I briefly talked about the culture piece of it. Digital learnability will become an extremely critical dimension for leadership hiring in the business. Now, when we start hiring digital leaders in the business leaders, the first thing we'll say, hey, is the person digitally oriented? Or there's always a deep desire to put ATM and people behind the ATM machine and get everything done by head count. Is there a natural inclination towards analytics? Is there some math proclivity? All these checks will be done, all these dimensions will be addressed when we're talking about leadership talent. Very quickly, there is a business part of it and there is a core tech part of it. What this slide tells you is the core tech pieces. That for this change to happen, not only should the core, the front end, the experience and the analytics happen, but to enable that entire front end, what work would be required at the back end. And the back end, when you're talking about building structural capability across these, a very diverse stack, which means tomorrow in our organizations, our digital teams will be highly fractionalized. Instead of having one team that has got only 10 skills and let's say you've got 10 people having each skill, tomorrow you will have a very diversified fractional team with a very wide variety of skills. But all that has to come in an agile manner, in a boundaryless manner to deliver a project end to end, which means the structural, traditional org structures will not work to manage such a team. You will have more CFTs, more cross-functional teams. DevSecOps, test automation, I think more and more focus on these automation tools, more and more focus on moving from a monolith to a loosely coupled architecture. If that does not happen, sorry, our legacies will always continue to bite us and slow us down on whatever digital transformation or analytics that we want to drive. Movement to cloud will become extremely critical for two reasons. One, from a security perspective, actually three. Security perspective, second, a natural DR. More and more enterprises in our industry will move towards cloud only to provide a natural DR, only to provide better security and to provide better scalability. Our industry is fairly cyclic, right, in terms of months. This industry writes almost 20% of its business in month of March, right? The question is, how do you scale up for that transaction? Only for 30 days. I'm sure you don't want to end up paying for infrastructure for all the year, right? So the question is, how do you drive scalability and elasticity in our design so that we are able to scale up whenever we need compute and scale down when we don't need it significantly? And finally, the model itself. Should transformation be done at one place or should be done dispersed in the enterprise? How do we deal with that? On the data side, I think all of us know the entire data value chain. There are key questions to be asked now at each stage. The only difference that I would like to leave all of us with, I'm running short of time, but only few thoughts on data and analytics pieces that I would like to leave with is, when we look at this entire data value chain, this is what it will take in terms of skills. We are talking about one single team. Initially, if you see the old world, architecture and tech in data was sitting at one place. Actually, architecture was sitting in one place, data engineering sits in one place, business analytics sits in the third place, and the business and the consumer and the user sits completely at a different place. That's typically how traditional org structures have been built. Would some of you agree with that? Right? But if you look at the world in the future, people will have to build applications for them to be analyzed upon to begin with. Analytics will not be done offline like it is done today. Today, analytics is used for risk decisions, it's used for next best actions, it's used for many other events, but it is done offline. And a decision is injected into the transaction at some point of time. Tomorrow, that analytics will have to be run at the front end, at the point of transaction, and hence you will see an extreme change around the architecture where it's in-line analytics rather than offline analytics. The mix, approximately 50% of an analytics team will be techno-functional in nature. Means people who understand business and the associated models with that. About 25% will purely do modeling and orchestration. And some parts of it completely focused on translation. What does the use case mean in terms of building an analytics model? And finally, a part of it which is completely focused on, okay, fine, I have built the analytics solutions. How do I now integrate this analytics solutions in the flow of the business transaction? So multiple skills required to come together. And this is my last slide. This is just a few questions that one has to answer around analytics, setting up an analytics organization. First, starting from the bottom, what is the structure? What is the team structure? What is the underlying information structure required for us to set up a data ecosystem in the first place. Because challenge today is not building the great models. I can tell you right now. The challenge today is not building a great analytics model. It's not the challenge. In fact, in GPT-4, all those, a model like random forest is inbuilt into GPT-4. It's inbuilt. Modeling is dead. Modeling will not be a differentiating skill going tomorrow. The challenge will be, do you have data in the form or shape that you can even try to do analytics on it? The dimensionalization, the storage, the retrieval, most importantly, the data hierarchy, data dictionaries. Are they consistent across the enterprise? Somebody will still be storing some data in their Excel on their laptop. How do you deal with that? So that preparation is extremely important. Data engineering, these teams have to come together. So obviously that becomes a very critical part. But few parts which are extremely soft but extremely critical is, unless the business leader starts asking a question that I will only review business on intelligence dashboards and not on Excels, not on spreadsheets, not on PPTs. The culture of building a data or an intelligence-driven enterprise will absolutely not be possible unless there is a change and a sponsorship right from the top of the organization. Very quickly on how MaxLive has implemented this. We took a very simple call that we'll take verticals, which is sales, issuance, onboarding, and the enterprise. But these are, so we build vertical capabilities, very clear business goals, KPIs for each of those towers written in the gray out here. 85% of our underwriting today is humanless. A human being does not look at 85% of the cases applied. It is automatically underwritten by the systems. But then what's far more important is the horizontals at the bottom. How do we build a great AI and analytics layer? How do we have the right architecture for that scalability? How do we build the right talent? And how do we build the right culture? Similarly, on the analytics piece, we are still in the journey, friends. And as you can see, we'll be about 65 to 70% penetration in the key business processes in each of these areas as far as inline analytics is concerned. It's a journey. It's a journey. We have reached about 40 to 50%, 60% across the various functions. A lot of work has been done around building point solutions, approaches towards applying analytics to real life business problems. Just to give you some numbers, 723 crores of fraud was prevented only by analytics functions in the last 1 year. 723 crores of fraudulent claims payouts. About 700 medical diagnostic centers delisted by us, because now you have the ability to have a machine learning algorithm which says, hey, these HbA1c readings are fake readings. But simple, Indians have a certain distribution of HbA1c. Yeah? If a lab is constantly giving you 6.0, 6.0, 5.9, 6.0, 6.0, you know something is wrong. Because that's not, it doesn't represent the distribution of Indians, right? How do you catch it? With analytics, with machine learning, we have been able to catch fraudification, we have been able to catch twins applying for their dead counterpart policies, all through Vision AI, right? So there is a penetration, there is a applicability of across all these use cases. That was my last slide. Would love to take any questions, but I hope in this session I've covered the challenges that it takes, what it takes for insurance industry, people like us, what real issues we face, and how do we start addressing and looking at some of those dimensions as we look at driving penetration of digital and AI into our enterprise. Thank you.